My name is Candace Noonan and I'm a licensed esthetician in the state of Florida in the US. But full disclosure, I am the Director of Education for DermaConcepts, the exclusive distributor of Environ Skincare in the US. I have to tell you a bit of my background so that it really will help tie into the topic that I want to be speaking about today. Pigmentation and melanogenesis, and it's really quite the passion of mine because I've had such personal experience with it. The accent, you can tell. I was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa, and at the age of 13, my older sister took me for my first bra, my first wax, and my first Environ Skincare. I didn't know at that stage that Environ Skincare was a South African brand, but what I appreciate about the story is that it was ingrained in me from a very young age to really try and take care of my skin. And as a culture in South Africa, we're really aware of the danger of the sun and how it can damage the skin. So I used Environ through my teenage years, and around the age of 21, my husband and I left South Africa to go backpacking. It's a pretty typical thing for South Africans, Australians, New Zealanders, British, European, to take sort of that gap year to travel. Well, my gap year turned into 6. And hubby and I bounced around the world, freedom without responsibility. After a night in Lake Tahoe where we were working for a ski season, we had dollar shots of Jaeger and dollar drafts. We conceived our son. At that stage, we'd seen 48 of the 50 states, and we loved Florida out of all the states for multiple reasons. And so we decided to come and settle here. And as soon as I arrived into Florida, I was coming into my 3rd trimester, my pigmentation flared. It was horrid. People actually thought that I got sunburns and I was peeling because of the way it really changed my skin. So in my 3rd trimester, I decided I was gonna go back to school, and I enrolled at the local beauty academy and I got my Florida license. And then my son was born, and as soon as he was born, I decided now I want to tackle my skin and my face and get rid of this pigmentation. I was researching ingredients and researching products that were hydroquinone free, and I specifically was looking for something that was hydroquinone free because although I know it works really, really well, it's also highly controversial. It has been banned in every country for over-the-counter use since the 1990s. So people have for a long time known that hydroquinone, for unregulated amounts of time with just using home care that you've picked out yourself and hasn't gone through a professional, people are overusing and abusing this ingredient, and it's cytotoxic to all the cells and system in the skin. It has unfortunately a very dark side to it, and that's the literal part of it. The rebound pigmentation after you misuse hydroquinone is extremely bad, very difficult to deal with, and in some skins can even cause a condition called onchonosis, which is almost impossible to see an improvement with. Well, I said almost impossible. So I stumbled across Environ Skincare again, and having grown up on it, I recognized it, I knew it, I believed in it, and so I found that they were having a local training, 2-day training. So I handed my 3-month-old over to the husband and spent 2 days and dived very deep into Environ Skincare, and that sort of triggered my love and reawakened me to how much I appreciated Environ Skincare. And what I'm saying to you, this isn't a sales pitch, but what I'm saying to you is that you need to find a skincare line that is scientifically based. That's the only way you're truly gonna make a change to your skin. There's got to be science behind it. And I think at the end of the day, ultimately, that's what I am. I like to think of myself as a little bit of a scientist. I enjoy the idea of really delving deep into the ingredients, how they work, and what it is that they do on your skin. And that's where the change has come in. So during this time, I'm not so much going to speak to Environ Skincare, although there is that underlying message. What I really am going to speak to is the science behind the ingredients that have really been able to change my skin. So I think at this time, it's really going to be important for me to show you what I mean and give you a little vision of my before. So this before is my 28th birthday, and I was in that last trimester with my pregnancy. And the after was my 39th birthday. And in the after photograph, just like now, not wearing any makeup, I've been able to really get my melasma under control. So that's what I'm going to be speaking to you about, is the melasma, the premise as to why it happens, what goes wrong, why does it go wrong, what cells and systems are involved, and then how it is that we can really address it with the use of simple topical ingredients, a device and a procedure. I watched this amazing TED Talk by Nina Jablonski. She speaks on skin color is an illusion. And you can find it on TED Talk, and it was posted around July 2009. What I love about this talk is that she speaks about the evolution of skin color according to our location on the planet Earth. Now, when you watch it, she has this great story about Darwin, and he traveled and he theorized the theory of natural selection. But what he didn't pick up on through his travels is the skin color of the peoples that he was meeting. And she says, oh, if only Darwin had NASA. She shows how skin color is specifically linked to UV radiation. Your eyes are a light meter. And every time you go out into sunlight, they are registering the amount of UV and then influencing melanogenesis to create darker skin toned. So over time, people with high UV exposure evolved to have very dark skins in order to capture that UV radiation so as to not damage the skin. But as we moved away from the equator, we started to become ill because all that UV absorption meant that we weren't creating enough vitamin D in order to be happy and healthy. Not just happy. Happy is a big part of it, but healthy is even bigger. Vitamin D is a big part of our immune system. And in fact, vitamin D helps to further protect us from UV exposures. And that balance is in what's called your minimal erythral dose. It's half the amount of time that it takes your skin to turn pink when you go out into the sun. That's the exact amount of time that you need to make sufficient amounts of vitamin D. So the vitamin D conundrum is really difficult because we need it to be healthy. Our skin produces it. But if we overexpose ourselves to sunlight, our skin depletes it. So as an example, we have studies that show volleyball players, beach volleyball players in Brazil or Portugal or Venezuela, one of the countries where they play a lot of beach volleyball, those volleyball players were actually highly deficient in vitamin D, which is counterintuitive to what you would think. But it's because the vitamin D is being destroyed in order to protect their skin. And it's being destroyed through overexposure, through ultraviolet radiation. So Nina Jablonski basically gave me the insight into the fact that the eyes are a light meter. So that good set of sunglasses is really important. We also need to make sure that we're constantly covering our skin with a nice hat. And I go so far, and my family jokes at me, to even put on full cover-up. Those are, of course, extremes. But if you're in the industry and you're as serious about skincare as me, or you're really desperate to get rid of pigmentation, you gotta do what you gotta do. So when we look at melanogenesis, a very simple overview is that your skin get exposed to sunlight. The melanocytes, which are the skin cells that are responsible for skin's color, are stimulated through this UV exposure. They produce melanin through a process of converting L-dopa and dopaquinone into these little melanin granules, the building blocks. And then from there, transplanting these melanin granules into melanosomes, which then are transported through the dendrites, these long extensions from the melanocytes that then deposit this pigmentation into up to 36 surrounding keratinocytes. The problem is that there is a lot that can go wrong along those stages. So you have your UV exposure, and this stimulates the release of a lot of chemicals, one of which is melanin stimulating hormone. And that is due to the light exposure that is registered through your eyes. It stimulates the pituitary gland to release this MSH. Now, this, along with a lot of other chemical signals, are released by multiple cells, not just the pituitary gland, but the actual keratinocyte itself, the mast cell. Imagine that. Why the heck would the mast cell get involved with the melanogenesis process? They do. They release messaging as well. And all of this ultimately culminates in this communication that says to the melanocyte, okay, there's an increase in UV. We need to bump up production of the pigmentation so as to protect the DNA in the keratinocytes. This has really been where the focus of skin lightening products has been, this enzyme, tyrosinase. And we've got a lot of tyrosinase inhibitors, because what tyrosinase does is then oxidize tyrosine, and this, along with L-DOPA and dopaquinone, create the little melanin granules. So a lot of the focus has just been on that tyrosinase, because then theoretically the rest of the dominoes won't fall over, so to speak. Now, what we're starting to see is that if we really focus on all those events that take place in order to get to the end result of pigment being placed in the keratinocyte, then we have a better opportunity to really improve the pigmentation. But as you'll see, there's a lot more that goes into this than simple UV exposure. And as a melasma sufferer, remember my picture? I became very aware of the fact that it's not just UV exposure on its own that really exasperates or aggravates your pigmentation. It's important to understand the difference in pigmentation is what you have from UV exposure. An easier way to figure that out is to sort of look at its location, its size, and most importantly, is it mirrored? That's the quickest way that you can figure out if your pigmentation is UV exposure or hormonal exposure. UV exposure will be random, a spot on the cheek, freckling, that kind of thing. Hormonal pigmentation will have a pattern to it. You'll see a lot of young girls who just start out on the contraceptive pill, they have the pigmentation marks on their lips. It looks like moustache. But if you mirror one side of the face to the other, you'll notice that it is a pattern. The same with a pregnancy mask. You will notice that the one side of the face will mirror and butterfly the same way the other side of the face does. Usually you can see it up the side of the neck, on the forehead, the cheeks, on the chin, and then on the upper lip. So let's go back to basics with regards to the keratinocyte. So the keratinocyte is the predominant cell of the skin. It is responsible for 70 to 80% of the cellular population in the epidermis. The epidermis is the reason why we have a barrier function. The epidermis helps to protect from UV radiation. It has its own natural SPF built in according to the color of your skin, your Fitzpatrick type. It's responsible for sensation, heat, absorption, protection, elimination, and secretion. Now, your keratinocyte has an 8 to 10 day life cycle. It starts from mitosis and arrives in the stratum corneum. And then it takes another 5 to 10 days to desquamate. All of this changes according to your age. The older you get, the slower this becomes. So take this into consideration when you start thinking about how long a treatment program has to go on for in order to see an improvement in pigmentation. Because the older they are, the longer this process will take. Your skin cells are hydrophobic. They repel water. Thank goodness, or else we would pretty much balloon up in a swimming pool or every time we took a bath or shower. The same cell creates the epidermis of our skin, our hair, and our nails. There is an unlimited skin cell source of keratinocytes. Your skin will do anything heavenly possible to make sure that it becomes that barrier. It might be very ugly looking, misformed and unattractive and scarred, but your skin will always try whatever it can to be sealed. Your keratinocyte works in synergy with your melanocyte. Keratinocyte is the king of the epidermis, and it communicates with all other cells and systems and really controls how things flow. It also has the ability to activate the innate immune system. Now, the melanocyte, on the other hand, is a very long-lived, slow cycling cell. So what this means in reality is that if you have a melanocyte that is damaged due to UV exposure or heat through a laser or some unfortunate inflammatory response, a cut, an abrasion, too deep a chemical peel, whatever the cause was, that melanocyte will take a long time to be cycled through and be replaced by a young or a healthy melanocyte. Pigmentation problems might draw on for a long amount of time because of the slow cycling cell. We mentioned it is a dendritic cell, so it has long arms. This way the melanosomes transfer through those arms and are placed into the keratinocytes. It works in synergy with the keratinocyte as part of the barrier defense function. And one of the barrier defense function is to help protect the skin from UV radiation. And that's what pigmentation is created for. It's an amazing molecule, and it's able to absorb high intensities of energy without being damaged. We create brown pigment, eumelanin, and we create red pigment, pheomelanin. Now that we have a very basic understanding of how melanogenesis works, we have to think about what is it that goes wrong. Why? If my skin cells are cycling over every 48 days or so, why after the summer, after I'm not exposed to UV anymore, am I left with this wonderful little brown spot on my cheek? Or why, as a melasma sufferer, do I have this butterfly pattern even though I've stayed out of the sun? What's gone wrong? So there's a few things that go wrong. The first of which is the possibility of the melanocyte getting DNA damage. And now he is basically cuckoo. He doesn't get it. He's forgotten how much pigment he's supposed to be producing on a daily basis according to what your genetics had given you. So he might just be spewing out pigmentation with no way of correcting the bad behavior. Another thing that happens is that the dendrites shorten. And now instead of supplying 36 surrounding keratinocytes with pigmentation, evenly spreading out this pigmentation I've created, now I dump it into an area just around me. So then you can get that pigment dumping because of the melanocyte dendrite shortening. If the keratinocyte gets damaged, the DNA damage from the keratinocyte will also prohibit it from being healthy and performing and functioning in its normal homeostasis. The keratinocyte, remember, controls the melanocyte. So an unhealthy keratinocyte is not able to say, melanocyte, stop making pigment. You're being very naughty now. It's time to quit it. Cell-to-cell communication, if that is not working at an optimum, then the functioning of the skin as a whole becomes compromised. And when I was 18 and sunbathing and skimpy little bikini, putting on baby oil, trying to get that summer glow on, I didn't quite realize that all that excess pigmentation was being created wasn't being uptaken by the keratinocytes. That excess pigmentation is now saturating the epidermis, and the keratinocytes physically cannot pick up any more pigmentation. The excess pigmentation then falls through and seeps into the dermal epidermal junction, which is like a sea sponge. It's got lots of little nooks and crannies, perfect place for a pigment granule to hide out. Now, going back to the normal function of melanogenesis, how that pigment is transferred into the keratinocyte, it only changes color once it settles over the DNA and takes up its dark color. Otherwise, up until that point, it is clear and you don't even see it. So when I was young and dumb and sunbathing with baby oil and producing all this excess pigmentation, that at that point I'm like, It's clear, it doesn't bother me. Now in your 30s, that oxidizes and shows up, and now it's trapped pigmentation and very difficult to get rid of. So that's another thing that goes wrong. When you were young, you produced excess pigmentation that wasn't able to be uptaken by the keratinocytes, so it's got saturated and filled in through the dermal-epidermal junction, and now you've got this nice little pigmentation spot that just doesn't want to go away. Then through UV exposure, there are multiple communication pathways that are activated, most of which are inflammatory. And these inflammatory messages stimulates the production of pigmentation even more. There's incorrect gene expression, there's increased enzyme activity, there's an increase in inflammatory cytokines, and there's an increase in melanosome transfer. It seems like an impossible task, but there is help. So what we have to do is manage the 6 different pathways of pigmentation formation. First and foremost, reduce the exposure. Reducing the exposure to UV not only can be physical and extreme, but it can also be through sunscreen. It's important to think about sunscreens because we have so many different options on the market. Which one should I use? I think for pigmented skin, first and foremost, the biggest thing you need to look for in your sunscreen that it has fragrance. This is going to exacerbate your pigmentation. So make sure that your formulation is fragrance-free. When it comes to choosing your sunscreen, make sure that it has a physical blocker in it, like titanium dioxide or zinc oxide. And this is a physical block that sits on top of the skin and actually reflects light away. Versus the chemical sunscreens, which actually penetrate into the skin. They then absorb the UV energy, but as you know, energy doesn't die, it changes. So this UV energy then is transformed into heat, which is dissipated into the skin. Now, under normal circumstances, that may seem fine. But for a pigmented skin that is highly sensitized, these sunscreen chemicals now will exacerbate and cause more pigmentation through the inflammatory process of releasing that heat into the skin. You ever thought to yourself, wow, I feel allergic to this sunscreen, or when I wear sunscreen, my skin actually burns worse? Check that sunscreen, check for sunscreen chemicals, and switch to a physical sunscreen, which will probably do you and your pigmentation much better. Next step is the inhibition of tyrosinase. Now, as we mentioned, this is really where everybody focused, and this is where hydroquinone's great claim to fame is the inhibition of tyrosinase. But this isn't the only area that we need to focus on. There's other areas that we need to stop those dominoes falling. But tyrosinase inhibitors, like hydroquinone, stop some of the process, but we know hydroquinone is controversial, so what are the alternatives? Vitamin C, alpha-arbutin, these are all alternatives to hydroquinone in its tyrosinase inhibiting activity. Then from there, we're going to competitively block tyrosine activation, inhibit tyrosine conversion, reduce the transfer of melanin into the keratinocyte. And in this way, we're going to reduce overall pigmentation. Recap, UV exposure stimulates not only melanin stimulating hormone through the activation of the pituitary gland in the eyes, but it stimulates the release of a lot of inflammatory cytokines from the keratinocyte and the mast cells. And all of this activates tyrosinase. Tyrosinase oxidizes tyrosine, and along with L-dopa and dopaquinone, the actual melanin granule is created. From there, it's transferred into the keratinocyte. So with UV exposure, we're going to use sunscreen and physical blocks to ensure that we're limiting our sun exposure. We're going to use tyrosinase inhibitors to block the oxidation of tyrosine. We're going to use melanin stimulating hormone inhibitors to block the activation of the melanogenesis cycle. Then we're going to use antioxidants because this entire process creates a lot of stress for the melanocyte, the poor baby. And so by creating a lot of pigmentation, he creates a lot of free radicals. So we really need a lot of antioxidants to help that free radical process, which ultimately will damage the melanocyte again. And then we're going to look at ingredients like Clear U that are going to stop the transfer of pigment from the melanocyte into the keratinocyte. So for me personally, I used all of these ingredients that really helped to block the pigmentation process on all these areas. I used physical block sunscreen with titanium dioxide. It had added antioxidants because sunscreens fail. So we need to ensure that if you don't apply enough, or if it's rubbed off or sweat off, the antioxidants are there to really help to mop up any of that excess damage. Then we use anti-inflammatory type of ingredients like neem leaf extract, Sakura extract B, ingredients like bioaffinity, Sepi white MSH. Let's talk about one of the most important ingredients that you have in your arsenal when treating the appearance of pigmentation. Scientific studies have shown that vitamin A is a DNA corrector. Here we have a solution to one of the problems in the melanogenesis story that's gone wrong. Lots of different forms of vitamin A that are available. What has worked really well for me personally are the ester forms, because the acid form is retinoic acid, is photosensitizing. So for a skin that's already prone to be sensitive to light, for me that wasn't a great idea. There are retinols that you can use, but in the beginning stages when my skin was highly sensitized, the retinols just didn't do well for me. I really had to build up to using them. In the beginning stages of treating the melasma, I particularly focused on the esters, retinol palmitate, retinol acetate. And then later on, retinol propionate was included. What was really beneficial was the ability to have these vitamins presented in a program where you graduate from strength to strength of the ingredients, because even my very sensitive skin at that stage could then benefit from these ingredients that I knew would help with pigmentation, but I couldn't tolerate high doses of it. So as I moved through the program, I was able to get better and better results because of the increasing dosage, and I mitigated all the associated redness or irritation that usually comes with vitamin A use. Vitamin A in high doses is really one of the keys to improving pigmentation, and I think the key to the success in my skin. I attended a workshop once where the instructor basically told me that with my skin at the age that I was at, I was at 32, and she looked at me and she said, I think it's best for you to stop worrying about your pigmentation, but instead focus more on the anti-aging effects of your skincare regimen, because I don't think that pigmentation is going away. You know, between the age of 30 and 35, we lose 10% of our functioning melanocytes every year. So the rest of the melanocytes are under so much more pressure and duress. So at that stage, to really correct my skin, she was saying it was going to be really impossible. Look at me now. I'm grateful that I didn't take her advice and I didn't listen to her, and I really did focus on the pigmentation and all these correctors, and I've managed to see a huge improvement in my skin. Now, not only did I use vitamin A, I used vitamin C, but I was very particular about which form of vitamin C I used. Again, I stayed away from the acids because I live in South Florida. The acids make my skin more sensitive to sunlight, which is counterintuitive to trying to improve my pigmentation. So I used the oil-soluble form of vitamin C as a ascorbyl tetraisopalmitate. You can actually get 10 times more vitamin C into your skin itself because of that formulation. It's protected, so it doesn't oxidize, and you can get very fresh, very efficacious vitamin C in this formulation. I used high-dose vitamin A in a step-up program. I used high-dose vitamin C, and along with all those other supplemental ingredients like niacinamide, Sepi white MSH, alpha-arbutin, the neem leaf extract, Sakura, Clairue, all these ingredients that we've been speaking about. The biggest change came when I introduced cosmetic needling. What cosmetic needling does is improve the efficacy of your topically applied product 100-fold. So your skin is that barrier. It's a protective layer, and it's meant to stop ingredients from absorbing through it. But this presents an enormous conundrum when you're trying to improve your skin through topical application of product. What do? What we do is poke tiny little holes through it. It really improves the efficacy of your topically applied skincare products, because now I can actually get in to where they need to go to really make an improvement in your skin. I had to introduce the rolling very slowly, 2 to 3 times a week, and then I slowly but surely increased to as many nights a week that I could not only do in my regimen, but that my skin could tolerate. And typically what I would do is cleanse and tone my skin. I'm a drier skin type, so I used a creamier cleanser. I used a toner with lactic acid in, which is also a known hydrator and brightener. I used to cleanse and tone my skin, then I would roll my skin and apply my high-dose vitamin A, vitamin C, antioxidants, along with those other ingredients. Again, full disclosure, it was the Environ Regimen, and basically I'm using the Sequence line, so I'm using my Sequence Serum and Defense Cream, but I'm incorporating the cosmetic needling and the radiance range as well. And what I did in addition was add a high dose retinol. Once my skin was able to tolerate it, I only did it at night, and I could only really tolerate it 3 or 4 nights a week. By the 4th, 5th morning, I would wake up, my skin was dry, red, and irritated, so I would just lay off the retinol, perhaps lay off the rolling that weekend, and then Monday, crack at it again. And the results have been slow. The before and after is over a 10-year period, but there was slow improvements during that time period. I would equate it to losing weight. It's impressive when you see that 50-pound loss from one picture to the next picture, but you don't see the incremental loss between those stages and between those photos. See slow and sure and steady improvements, but it did take time. And of course, take into consideration, I live in South Florida. I've got a very active outdoor lifestyle. We have a boat, we go water skiing, we go snow skiing. So see that improvement while simultaneously living my lifestyle. I'm a big believer in the science of the ingredients and the technology that I used, being that home rolling device. In terms of professional, any treatments that I received, it was basically me doing it to myself. I stayed away from chemical peels in the beginning because my skin was so hypersensitive, but in the last couple years, I've been able to incorporate low-level lactic acid cream peels, just very slight 2.5%, 10-minute exposure, and done that on a weekly basis. I usually tend to do those treatments fall or winter because, again, I don't want to be exposed to sunlight while I'm undergoing that sort of 6-week series. And the last piece to the puzzle was medical needling. I actually had the privilege of returning to South Africa and having 2 medical needling treatments done. They were a year apart. Recommendation is different, but that's unfortunately just what I was able to receive at that time. But I think that was the next level up in terms of improving my pigmentation, because scientifically I have had this verified by 2 physicians, Dr. Ernst and Dr. Aust, that one of the reasons why medical needling helped with my pigmentation was the fact that your epidermis is very rarely exposed to blood. And by doing medical needling, you expose an epidermis to growth factors that under normal circumstances may never have been exposed to. And by restoring the communication between the melanocytes and the keratinocyte, I was able to slow the production of pigmentation and have it more normalized. I have a theory about the second reason why I think medical needling is so great for pigmented skin, specifically my indication that melasma, but also that long-term history of sun exposure in South Africa, where I produced all that pigment and I got trapped in my dermal epidermal junction. Theoretically, while you're going through the wound healing process, macrophages come in and they help clean up the area, sort of like vacuuming a construction site, keeping everything neat and tidy so that the construction workers don't walk around and stand on nails. While the macrophages are cleaning up this wound site from the medical needling, it's picking up all this pigmentation that's trapped in the dermal epidermal junction and in the dermis and going, you shouldn't be here, let me take you away. And some of the improvements theoretically could be from the removal of that dermal pigmentation through the wound healing phase. Your skincare line is only going to take you a percentage of the way. It's not a home run, just skincare alone. It's not even a home run skincare and professional treatments alone, because 90% of pigmentation improvement is going to come from your commitment to doing so. You have to be aware of your sun exposure, protecting your skin from sun exposure and making sure that you're not exacerbating your pigmentation by sitting on the beach. Yes, you have your hat on, but you haven't got any sunscreen on, and now all the light is being bounced off the water and off the sand and off the cars drying by, and you're still getting UV exposure. So you have to be aware of your environment and make sure you're limiting that sun exposure. Your skincare professional will not be able to help if in between your professional treatment series you go on a vacation to the Bahamas and you get a sunburn. That's going to set you back. So be aware of the timing of treatments, be aware of your sun exposure while going through it. Make sure you're putting on your SPF, make sure that it doesn't have those sunscreen chemicals that may irritate your skin. Opt for a titanium dioxide sunscreen that is going to really reflect those rays. Very important to focus your skincare regimen on vitamin A, the right form of vitamin A that's not going to sensitize your skin, and a vitamin A program that is able to get you to maximum permissible amounts of vitamin A in an over-the-counter product without a prescription. Being able to use that twice a day, that's a game changer. Vitamin C, antioxidants, and all these other ingredients that are going to block the different pathways of melanogenesis. Then, it's really important to take a look at your diet. Make sure that you're not essential fatty acid deficient. This means that the dendrites shorten, contributing to pigmentation dumping. An essential fatty acid can come in the form of omega-3s. As your skincare professional, I'm not able to prescribe any medications or even supplements to you. And in fact, all I can do is give you a professional recommendation to speak to your physician about supplementation of your diet, which can include the omega-3s, vitamin Ds, and antioxidants as well. Cosmetic needling is a must. We really need to get those ingredients to get to where they want to be so that we can make a change. Something that your esthetician is not going to be able to really give you much advice on, and it's really important to speak to your physician about, is the fact that some medications will make you more sensitive to light and therefore can be exaggerating and exacerbating your pigment issues. Things like taking St. John's wort. I used to take St. John's wort when I was little to help with my mercurial moods. That was a contributing factor to my skin being so sensitized to light. Painkillers, antidepressants, progesterone-based medications, cortisone or steroid meds, oral and topical chemotherapy, antibiotics or antifungals, essential oils like bergamot, fragrances. These are all things that you need to, during your client consult, ensure that you have a record of the clients having in their history or taking it currently, because that could A, contribute, or B, prolong the skin condition. And as I mentioned, after the age of 35, we lose 10 to 20% of our functioning melanocytes, which puts the rest of the system under huge duress. So this needs to be taken into consideration when recommending and devising a plan, because you might have to extend the program for a little bit longer for those more mature skins to really see an improvement. So ultimately, this is what I did. I avoided sun exposure, and if I do go out into the sun, I'm heavily protected. Remove the offending causes and contributing factors. I was able to get off antidepressants, which I was on after the birth of my son. After 2 years, I was able to come off those, and that's also the next step that I found improved my pigmentation. I really looked at my household. I made sure that I didn't burn any fragrances, that I didn't wear any fragrances. I supplemented my diet with omega-3s. I supplemented my diet with vitamin D and with antioxidants. I used SPF daily, reapplying every time I even felt or thought the word sun. My home care regimen was spot on. I researched the ingredients, I researched the science, and I knew that it really tackled all those different spots. Improved that with the use of cosmetic rolling almost every night. I gave myself professional weekly treatments, including those low-level chemical peels. I tried to use, as far as possible, technologies such as sonophoresis and iontophoresis to also enhance the activation of those ingredients. And then you can incorporate light therapies. There are some very promising studies that show that red light therapy, red LED, is able to even out the skin tone as well, and it's not going to be damaging for your pigmentation. So incorporating that according to your Fitzpatrick type and risk factors would also be something that you could look at. I hope that my journey through melanogenesis and my own personal story of melasma has given you some insight into what happens, what goes wrong, how can we attack it, and what we can do to prevent it from coming back. My name is Candace Noonan. I do appreciate your time. You can email me, Candace@DermaConcepts.com, or find me on Instagram @Candace Noonan. Thank you and be well.